So let me ask you a question. How many of you here today used to believe in something, used to, past tense? How many of you no longer believe in those things because somebody got in your face screaming and called you an idiot, brain damaged, and a retard? In many cases, people will prefer magic over science, and they will prefer fantasy over reality. And so actually debunking reinforces the things we're trying to debunk. So with all of this stacked against us, and this is a lot of stuff stacked against us, why in the hell would you want to make it harder to deliver that message? What I'm more concerned with is our demeanor, the way we do this. Remember, the odds are against us. And the key is obvious, to me at least, it's communication. It's communication. It's communication. It's communication.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Zeitgeist Movement Global Radio Show, TZM Global Radio. My name is Jason Lord. I am the California chapter coordinator for the movement. I've been volunteering now for more than several years. It's my honor to be joined today by three who I consider central people to the movement, its chapters, and our communication. I'm joined by both the former and current U.S. coordinators for the Zeitgeist United States chapter, Reba Melfa, the current coordinator, and Jen Wilding, who was our U.S. chapter coordinator for the first, 5 years. And I'm also joined by Eva Omori, who's also part of the Los Angeles chapter and helps me with the California State chapter volunteer activities, and also is a good sounding board for brainstorming ideas. Today's show, we wanted to talk about communication style as a TZM activist. One of the challenges people face as an advocate for a new social resource-based non-monetary model is how we communicate. And that's sort of central to the theme today, is how we communicate. Because what we hope you take away from this discussion today is that how you're communicating is just as important as what it is that you're trying to say. And this discussion will be based on our experiences from our efforts over the past 4 to 6 years as activists with the movement. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to the panel. And for the people listening for the first time today, why don't we do some introductions? Reba, why don't you go first?
Hi, everyone. I'm Reba Melfa, and I've been an activist for the Zeitgeist movement since, probably about 4 years now. I was the Humboldt County, California coordinator for several years, and back in December, the torch was passed to me by Jen to take on the U.S. coordinator role, and it's been a great journey, and I've learned a lot along the way, and I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, my name's Eva Omori, and I've also participated in the movement as a Los Angeles coordinator. I work most of my time now working more with operations, taking care of some of the back end as far as what it takes to keep our chapter flowing. One of the real, and I consider it a blessing, of working on a chapter level, on a local level, is a great opportunity to meet people on a day-to-day basis, not just a presentation, but face-to-face. And with that comes an experience of understanding how best to try and get information across that may be completely new, or maybe something completely familiar to someone, or information that's been reframed in so much that what's being said may sound familiar, and so it takes on some labeling. But I believe we'll go more into detail on that later. But thank you for the intro.
I'm Jen Wilding. As it was mentioned, I used to coordinate for the USA, and even prior to that, and a little bit overlapping, I started out as an Illinois chapter coordinator, and even before then was the person who initiated a Chicago discussion group before there were even chapters. So I've been with the movement since the very early days, since before the website was even completed, and it's been quite a journey that has been one of the greatest learning experiences of my life. And I mean, the kind of learning that I've gotten from my involvement in this social activism about specifically humans and sociology and the biggest challenges of life kind of all coming to a head, and really all people learning from all different levels and growing and rubbing up against each other, and the frictions that happen there has been some of the most amazing learning experiences that I could have ever gotten from anything. Quite an education. So I wouldn't take back any of it. I really am always thrilled to see other people step up into the roles of coordinator, which just means literally people coordinating, connecting, and organizing in a movement that everybody is contributing in some way, small and large. And we're always evolving as a movement, even though from the very beginning, the train of thought has been pretty much central. And what's beautiful about it is it's a template that allows that to be a dynamic process instead of a fixed process. So yes, communication is definitely at the forefront of people's concerns on a daily basis, from anywhere to what they do in chapters to what they're doing online. And I'm happy to lend any of my experiences to the conversation. And I'm glad we're having this discussion because it does come up from time to time. It's good to have some reminders of what's been tried and what has worked and hasn't worked. So thanks for this, Jason.
My pleasure. So one of the main things involved with just about everything that is trying to get something across or engage in education or have something they want to say is communication. And we are heavily based on that. Some of the goals, I jotted this down in our show notes, I see is from our efforts is one, we hope anyway, that our communications have an impact on the personal change of one's value system or one's worldview. As I was thinking about it, I also realized another hopeful outcome from our efforts is that people who are exposed to this information, whether it's through the films or a presentation that they saw online or from a live event, whether it was a town hall or Z-Day or the media festival or any of the other hundreds of events that happen all the time around the world, is that people exposed to this information have a new sense of self-discovery, a new way of looking and relating to the world around them. Another hopeful outcome, people come to see the relatedness that we have to each other as humans, and also have a new understanding where we can relate to our social system, or AKA our society, and to also have a regard for the natural environment that supports us all.
So those are some of the hopeful outcomes that we want people to come to understand through our communication efforts. And I thought this would be a good place to start our discussion today. Reba, why don't you go first? You've had a lot of experience starting off locally, doing local activism up in Humboldt County, and then stepping up to be the U.S. coordinator for the movement. What do you see here when it comes to our communication?
Something I've always had to stand up for as a coordinator, I've found myself really being someone that wants to help maintain the integrity of the movement and of the train of thought that we're advocating. And I've discovered through having chapter meetings and hosting events and talking to people online that it's pretty difficult for a lot of people to see the entirety of the movement. Often people grab onto a specific issue that they're passionate about, and it's a really important skill to have as a chapter member or as a coordinator or an activist for the Zeitgeist movement, is to show people how all of these smaller issues relate to the whole issue and be able to communicate about the whole of the issue. We're advocating for an entire paradigm shift. It's really important to be able to relate all of these small issues that people are passionate about. And I don't mean small, I don't mean insignificant. But I mean wedge issues, I mean truncated issues that people feel driven about, issues that actually drive people to become activists. As a TZM activist, you have to be able to relate it into the larger system, the global system, the global ecosystem, the global economic system. And this is something that I've had to really stand firm about and learn how to deal with people that want to be TZM activists and they don't know how to do it, So it's really important to be able to speak about the whole of the issue.
It's a really good point. It's important that we're able to understand this train of thought ourselves so that we can relate it to all of the smaller outcomes or issues that we see happening all the time in our society. And it's important for us to be able to bridge that gap through our own understandings and our ability to communicate the Zeitgeist movement to somebody else. So, Eva, your feedback on the topic of hopeful outcomes from our communication as TZM activists.
One of the things I realized earlier on as I started to advocate TZM was that one of the comments I made more than once was the movement grows as we as individuals grow. And I know initially, as a talking point to someone who's new to the movement, it can be kind of disjointed, but that's where I was in my development. It's critical. The personal change of one's values or worldview. The way it shows up now is if there was a person who was raised in a healthy environment, in the complete and total definition of healthy, I can't even imagine what that would look like. Now, that's not to diminish where anyone is at, other than to understand for myself how much of what we do is based on a static point of view. What I mean by static is not that I hold on to a point of view, more so that I didn't even realize that that was a static point of view. So a sense of self-discovery as far as changing our values and our worldview and having TZM grow, to me, is hand in hand. Now, I understand that one can look at the larger landscape and say, that's great, you can't talk to everyone on a one-to-one basis, but nonetheless, everywhere we go, we take that sense of discovery and values with us. And that's the outward focus of what the movement, the chapter structure is about, is the outreach. One of the conversations I had recently was with a young man that was struggling because though he understood the tenets and the direction and the orientation of the movement, the issues that he had were such that he just couldn't see clear of how we would get from here to there. He was looking for the laundry list. Granted, we were lucky. We had a few hours and we sat down and talked about it. And the method is in the communication. It's not specifically in what I said. I don't have a laundry list of things that if I cover these points, he's going to get it or she's going to get it. So these are really critical points in communication. And I understand also that it can be more challenging when you're talking not on a one-to-one basis, when you're talking more from something that's being recorded or a presentation. So one last caveat is in discussion, it has been shown that I can't introduce a possibility into a sufficiently closed mind. But what can happen are the seeds are planted. The positional tack that I could take in trying to reinforce a point is not the goal. The goal is to open the door and allow that person to see the possibility, not necessarily of even what I'm communicating, but that there is something different than the view that they're holding. So I know these can be very disjointed concepts without specifics. I suppose at some point we can go into specifics just as to illuminate the process, but I can't stress enough how important it is as an individual to keep the humility and the logic and information in a position such that I, Eva, am not the movement. I am still this person who's digesting this information. And the humility comes in the communication with others. In other words, I don't know what your world's experience is. I don't know what you've gone through, but I am here to facilitate as best I can a bridge so that we can have a conversation. So for me, as an outcome and a goal of our efforts, that's where it starts.
Excellent. Jen.
When I think about what we're all here for as a movement and what we're all excited about, and what I know got me fired up and what gets a lot of activists fired up is using science and technology to address problems at their root. And when I think about solving problems at their root, when you get to that and you think about the human problem, if you will, that keeps us from having an optimized structure for our own species. We're kind of getting in our own way. The root issue there can only be solved through education, because the alternative is through force. And if you're having to force something, it's not natural. And it also would mean that it's not solved at the root. So if we're really going to practice what we preach from a standpoint of education, we're going to recognize the importance of education and recognize that the only way for this to happen is if people want it to happen out of their own value set and having bridged the logical gap of connection of why they want it. Because if you have to do it by force, you didn't do it at all. And that's my take on it. So from that standpoint, what is our job? Our job is to create that bridge of interest. And that's probably the most challenging job anybody's ever had. And one of the things I always go back to when I'm talking to people who are becoming activists, who are very frustrated, when they're in that frustrated, well, what do I do? Not everybody's getting it. People are only halfway there or a third way there, or they connect to these three things and then they insert these things and they're really way off. And I have to say, well, first of all, let's look at our own expectations for the movement based on human behavior and reality, and how long the educational process is going to take, okay? It might be multi-generational. It may not happen in my lifetime, but there are some people that are frustrated because their resource-based economy agenda is scheduled for like next month or next year. And they're immediately going to be frustrated with what they're doing. And that's immediately puts them in a, how can I force people into keeping to the agenda? So I have to remind them, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. If we're going to actually work with what works with nature, and from that standpoint, I'm somebody who always says nurture is nature from a standpoint of human learning. And we need to nurture that. And how do we do it? Connecting with value sets. And I'm also not somebody who thinks that people have a wrong core value set. I think that's already installed. Okay. Everybody's in survival mode, and that's how they're making decisions emotionally. It's just the superficial value set of that we need money in order to solve problems. We need, material things in order to solve problems, and we need to be competitive because that's the only option we have. And those kinds of things, those are just based on being not aware of other options. So that's where we come in. We introduce people to new options in a way that is favorable to them. It is sort of a pitch. It's, you might be interested in this. It's going to connect you to solving your core problem of feeling unstable or insecure in, your personal safety or interpersonal relationships too, the stress that comes from our environment, and, people that are in a war zone, fighting over resources. We're talking about how to resolve those issues at the root. And so, yeah, I think it's both a matter of wrapping your mind really around that concept and also using it in the way that we introduce the information, recognizing that we're going for a root change there as well.
Thanks. That was excellent. That was well said. So I wanted to move down to our first main discussion point, which is a theme of the show today, which is our communication style. For those of you who might be just tuning in, we were just giving a quick overview of, as people have been involved as chapter coordinators in the movement for the last several years, our goals and efforts from our communications, the importance of how we communicate, as well as what we're saying and how we're saying it to people, so that they are open to what we have to say, so that they can hear something new. And because you're also realizing that we're speaking into people's filters, which are, everyone has a listening. If you grew up in a different nation, you'll have a different listening based on the national tendencies and the economic structures and the social traditions of that nation or of that social system you're brought up in. Those will be the filters that are basically given to you that you listen through. And so each of us has a listening. So when you're engaging somebody, having an awareness of who you're speaking to becomes important in communication style. So our style of communication, I had written a few notes down here. One of the things that popped out for me when thinking about, when I'm communicating with people, how do I want to accomplish my goal? How do I want people to hear about this train of thought, hear about a new economic structure that's not monetary based, hear how people could actually cooperate, and hear how cooperation trumps competition. And when we look at the natural world from a systems point of view, there is nothing but cooperation going on, even though we could break it down into smaller component parts and see what we would call chaos. But it's a holistic system, and we are all part of the holistic Earth system, if you will. How are people going to hear this if they're based on a point of view of money's the only way, or if they're based on the point of view politics is the only way? And one of the methods I've picked up is present information versus telling people what to think. I had a few notes here for myself, was like, I'd rather show someone why a systems approach to social organization is a good thing for human health and it's good for environmental integrity, rather than make a statement about how right or wrong their views are on any given topic. I'd rather explain the benefits so that they can actually hear that, avoiding all of the triggers. If someone's has a belief in God, then I'm not going to tell them to not believe in God, because they'll shut down on me and they're not going to listen to a thing I have to say. If somebody
believes that money is the only driver of human motivation, that it takes a profit incentive to get people to do anything or nothing would get done, if somebody believes that innovation comes through competition only, if you tell them they're wrong, they're going to shut down on you. So rather than engage somebody on their particular viewpoints, which is very polarizing, I'd rather present new information. And look, this is how most of us probably came to the Zeitgeist movement. Majority of us came through the films, watching new information presented in an artistic, creative, and very emotionally compelling way to break down our biases, to actually be able to take a new look at our social system and understanding where the problems are coming from, which is a key point. So that was a part of my communication style, is to always try to be having an output of information, but not telling people what to think, because that doesn't work very well. To quote the author of the Bad Astronomy blog, Phil Plait, whose perspective on communication I happen to like very much, when is the last time somebody changed their mind because you called them an idiot? When's the last time somebody changed their mind because you said their view was wrong? You're assuming people reasoned themselves into the views that they have, where most likely the views that people have are based on an irrational thought process. And this is why we have things like faith, and we believe things, or what is faith? It's believing something without evidence. It's regardless of the evidence, you believe it anyway. If somebody's not reasoned themselves into position and you're just going to tell them they're right or wrong about it, it doesn't work very well. So we have to find different ways to bridge the communication gap. So on this topic of communication style, having people being open to what you have to say, presenting new information, let's bring the conversation back to our panel. And Reba, let's get some feedback from you on this.
Sure, Jason. Yeah, what you're talking about is opening up the door for receptivity in people. And when enough information is presented to them and they feel receptive and they feel as though it's an open door that they can choose to walk through, and when their curiosity is piqued, they will maybe ask for more information, or they will come and look on our website and look for more resources, and then they will have questions and they will feel as though they're participating in it. And it is, as Eva said before, self-discovery, a journey of self-discovery on their behalf. And you're just, facilitating that. If you're in an environment where you see information being shared in a way and you can participate in it and you can take time on your own to feel as though the information is accurate and you can go and check it out yourself, then you're more receptive to changing maybe biases you've held for a long time. And that's, something that we have the ability to do within the Zeitgeist movement, because we have so much information to share with people. And there's always a resource that will communicate to someone, to different personality types. And if you give people the opportunity and open the door for them, when they're ready, they're going to ask for more information.
Absolutely. And that's a good point on people changing their previously held beliefs or changing their biases. because of new information they were exposed to. And not just being exposed to new information, that's too general, but when we're talking about in the Zeitgeist movement, this train of thought, transitioning out of monetary system, understanding how a system is something you can transition from, what the mechanics are, money, and moving into a resource-based economy, and why that's a good thing, why that would actually be better, and how we can actually accomplish those goals. People will come to new understandings, and how you present that will have a large impact on their receptivity. So staying with this topic, let's get some feedback from someone else on our panel. How about you, Jen or Eva? I know you both have a lot of experience with this.
A few things I want to cover, but first of all, what happens in a communication or in a discussion is when information is provided, I wind up asking more questions, especially when it's something that's new or a held thought as far as how I understood things to operate. And I think that's really important when we're in communication and have the ability to have questions and feedback, is to be able to flush out even our own biases and our own perspectives. Does that mean I adopt someone else's? No, it simply means I now have more information. So with that in mind, as far as communication styles, for me personally, if you want me to shut down immediately and really not hear a word you're saying, all you have to do is tell me what I'm feeling. So if I present something and I'm passionate about it and someone says, oh, you're just feeling this or that, anything you really say after that point, I'm not listening to. Now, this is something obviously I have to work on, because I actually can weed through the emotional targeting and get to what the subject matter is. But likewise, telling me what it is I think, you'll probably get half my listening, partially to see, did you listen to what I said before you responded? And the other part of it is perhaps my communication style is something that I can adjust, so that if you're telling me what I'm thinking and it's not what I'm communicating, then that's something that I can work on. So the idea of telling someone what to think, I really don't see how that can be effective. And I don't make it a habit. If there are things that need to be discussed and they're important, I may follow through with a level of integrity that people find at times disturbing, because I do question a lot and I take responsibility for what my conclusions are. Therefore, if you're providing me information, I want that information. It's not because I doubt what you're saying, I'm being thorough. So these are, again, understanding my own communication style is very important, because not everybody has the same style. And as I meet more people and find out ways to interface or to bridge, I can temper my style of communication. The reason this is, to me, very important is that most of the arguments I've heard in regards to not understanding or not being in agreement or having questions about the movement have all distilled down to, that's good, science can take care of that. Well, that's good, we can do this and take care of it. It's the mechanics of it. But this isn't going to happen because, and it'll always be the human condition, the preset already understood way that humans respond. And to me, that's like taking it from the it's impossible phase into, okay, now we're talking about the way we're conditioned. And that to me is the first step to understanding that when we're talking about individuals and how they respond to something, to map that onto everyone probably isn't the best idea. We can talk about how certain groups or individuals or people that look a certain way, but it's very dangerous in a communication to start finger pointing and saying that, well, they all think that way. Now, in a communication with someone, that's easy to bring out. It's easy to see that why someone may think that and address it from that standpoint. Get past the human condition being the reason why we are not going to obtain our goal. And then finally getting to a position where someone asks, well, what can I do? Or how is this done? So to me, the communication aspect, I can't stress enough, because unfortunately or fortunately, how we feel about our communications with individuals will sometimes taint everything else. And I do understand that this is a process, and perhaps another person can communicate it in such a way that someone else will get it. So again, we're planting seeds, or I'm planting seeds. I'm not necessarily trying to make sure it gets watered, sun, and everything that it needs nutritionally to grow. Sometimes we get to see that, sometimes we don't. But it's very important as a step-by-step process that we're aware of our own personal biases in our communication as we're talking to others.
Okay, great. I like the fact that you've got plenty of personal experience with this. I know not only with the movement, but also with your line of work and dealing with people. I also work inside of a labor union, so the biases around me are strong. If I engage somebody in a conversation about people cooperating rather than having to go to their labor for income job. So I can relate to your challenges there and what your self-awareness, basically.
Yes, part of what I do, I have my regular 7 to 5 job, but I also am elected as a regional officer for the AFL-CIO, which is a union, one of our locals. And if you want to see how positioning and argumentative and biased and self-serving communications can take you down a path where nothing is resolved, that would be the place to do it. And because of my experience with the movement, it takes a lot more work to bridge all the gaps in the communications along all the involved departments, but it's what's necessary and essential. And the fact that it can be done in that environment tells me that it can actually be done anywhere where the positioning isn't perhaps so personal, but nonetheless, the dire imperative of what the movement is addressing is. And that's something that I'm sure part of what we're attempting to communicate as well. This is not psychology, or this is not an ideology that would be nice that we adopt. This is fundamentally something that is a possibility that at this point our human species is capable of doing. And so why aren't we?
Exactly.
So let's move on to another panelist here in our discussion today. Jen, you had written some notes down on personal bias in communicating, and I'd like you to expand upon that for the listeners.
One of the things that I've noticed about the movement in general and why we have such a challenge in the communication area is that we forget that there is a certain quality to early adopters that was there before the Zeitgeist movement existed in order for it to exist. So if we look at the sampling, and we can include ourselves because we've been in the movement for a while, as early adopters of this idea, and have to ask ourselves what primed us to be able to receive this information enough to want to advocate it. So for us, right at the root, we get it and we want others to get it too. But what were the conditions that allowed for that? And that's part of the education that I'm interested in, because it's the pre-education. And a lot of that is knowing that you're not your story, knowing that you're not your thoughts, already having some knowledge about cultural conditioning and how it impacts you, already having an awareness about personal bias. When you kind of look at that, you realize, okay, the average Joe may or may not fit that model. And you have to adjust your own expectations. A lot of times the early adopters just project onto everyone else outside of them that, well, if I got this just because I saw a video, then they'll get it too. And then when that doesn't happen, we say, well, what's going on? This is so frustrating. Well, the reason it's frustrating is because you projected that they had all the connections made that you already had. And I even, when I was doing work as a U.S. coordinator, I would have some chapters come up and say, well, we're not having the same result other chapters are having. And for example, many years ago in New York City, densely populated city, they couldn't get it going like other largely dense populated cities were having higher receptivity to the information. And so my questions to that group, in meetings was, well, what are you doing? And I found out that what they were doing was going to the street and starting conversations that they called debate. And I was like, oh, interesting. So are you finding that no one's coming along with you? Like, yes, that's our experience. Well, have you realized that the actual structure of debate is not made to win someone to your opinion? The structure of debate is actually, even in the political realm, is not for the people in the US. It's like if Republicans or Democrats are debating, it's not for Republicans or Democrats. It's for the undecided. So if let's just say hypothetically, you have people taking positions on a debate, you may have 45% on one side, 45% on another side, and 10% undecided. Your only audience who's really weighing and maybe getting information from the debate is at 10%. But the other thing you may not be realizing is that the debate actually, it reinforces the opposing side's views, because now they have a psychological and emotional association with an us versus them that solidifies their own view. So there's a counterproductivity to the debate as a model, as a communication structure. And I can say this as someone who, I was recruited for my high school debate team, and I know all about debate, and I've done the exercises, and I'm actually pretty good at it if I need to do it. But for the movement, I opt out of that. For me, that's something on the sidelines for people who are wanting to play for the most part, because the very nature of that communication is counterproductive in that if you're doing something, which I like to do, outcome-based strategy in my communication, and if my outcome is I actually want to win someone over to my view, which is the case. I want someone to be interested in a resource-based economy and understand why they should be interested in it, right? What benefit it would be to them. I'm not going to start out in a way that naturally creates an adversarial position. I'm going to start out by addressing the value system that we share, like the underlying values. I would actually start, instead of talking, by listening or asking a question. Probably if I'm approaching somebody, I'm first vetting them to see if they'd be somebody that might be open, not just a stranger, but maybe there's already a conversation taking place. A lot of the activism that really works well is if you're going to where there's a traffic of, people walking who are outside of an event that is related to an issue that people are fired up about. For example, some of our activism events was after Michael Moore's Capitalism, a Love Story movie. People were fired up after that and ready to have conversations afterwards. That was super easy activism. And the reason why is because you source that out. And then you have I know why you're angry. And you know what? You have a right to be angry. And if you're wanting to, shoot off about some ideas, like, we have some ideas about how to address some of these issues, and it actually is beyond politics and money. I don't know if you're interested. And that puts it in a different framework than I have something that you need to know, because that's a little bit of evangelistic. And if you've ever been evangelized to by somebody who has a different view, you may even be able to recall that kind of disgusting feeling you had, whether you don't even know what they have to say, but the approach was already off-putting. So presenting information, I would even go so far as to listening and just speaking to the values that they already care about and how a resource-based economy is going to address that. And one of the ways that I have talked about this publicly is that, we had a Z-Day in 2012 that I did a communication-related presentation. If anybody wants to look that up, you would search Communicating RBE Concepts, and it was from our Zeitgeist Day 2012 in Los Angeles. I kind of went through my exact strategy and a couple of different examples on finding the common thread, the common ground that you have with those people. And number one, affirming first where they're right. If you make someone wrong in the first way, or, even with a label, or even with an orientation of putting them in a position of ignorance, you've already done your own goal and injustice. So I want to be sensitive to that. And now, Jason, you mentioned Phil Platt. People may not know who he is, but he's got a good presentation online. And he's a skeptic, and he's an astronomer, and he's got a great presentation we often circulate called Don't Be a Dick. And he basically calls out skeptics on, look, you didn't come to this information because somebody insulted you. And it's true, but it's something that's forgotten because we get so passionate about, you're thinking in woo-woo terms or whatever it is. Like, you're in a totally wrong place. And I can have those thoughts internally. And, I'm sure that people are having thoughts about me when they disagree with me. But my goal in communication, specifically around activism, has got to be like knowing my audience. I want to know what they care about, and I want to speak to that. And then from there, the job is cultivating, which is part of our value set, cultivating an appetite for self-discovery and that awareness of personal biases through learning the scientific method, through learning how to evaluate information, and just tell me how to do it. And then maybe I will be watching people who I admire in the movement paying attention, like through example. And it's a very non-threatening way to introduce people to new information. And for me, it's the best way is to set the example. And the thing is we're always going to have within the movement people at all levels of learning. We're going to have people who get it at all various percentage points, and some people who are way off. But the way that they might be introduced to different and new information that's more accurate is probably going to be because they meet people in the movement that they, number one, respect. And those people are going to be the people that are affirming them in some way. They're going to be validating them in some way. And then the best way past that, let's say you're having casual conversation, you want to feel out how open someone is to maybe considering alternative information. You just ask questions. There's a way to ask questions where you're also sort of backhand insulting them too. And I would just say, just ask a question and just feel out if they're interested in new information. And if they aren't, don't force it. Because again, this is a root cause educational movement. Like if you try to do it by force, you'll probably just go into that debate mode, that competitive mode where we naturally, our defenses go up and we dig our heels into the ground. Like, no, you're not going to make me wrong. I'm right about this. And that person will probably never hear anyone in the next several months on that issue just because you push that button. We're emotional human beings. That's just how we operate. And even people who think they make decisions logically, I hate to break it to them, but what they've really done is they've attached positive emotions to logical methods of making decisions, which is good. That's a good thing to do. But it's still based on an emotional connection to that thought process. So we're emotional beings. That's how we, at our core, at our subconscious, which is kind of my professional area of expertise, that's where we're really making decisions. And that's what you have to appeal to.
And I like the commentary too on debates and debating people. I make a distinction between presenting information for educational purposes and engaging someone in debate. Debate is another form of warfare where someone wins and someone loses, and you have a vested interest in both sides. And like you said, the debate itself validates the person who might have an opposing view. The very fact that you're debating them substantiates whether they're right or wrong, whether they're being rational or not, substantiates the emotional position that they have invested in their particular topic. I know it's not about the topics people debate about. It's about the act of engaging in it. And what we're finding as effective when we're trying to communicate and what seems to not work too well. And that led me into also contrasting debate to say something else. What would you do instead of? Well, Q&A, questions. Questions are great. Q&A sessions as an effective learning tool because there's an audience participation, there's a participation of all parties, and it's an exploratory process versus an adversarial process. So that was something that came up while I was listening to you talk about that.
Just a side note, I want to say debate isn't really about the way to decide what's right. I will say a win or loss in a debate is just about who is better at counterpoint and can sound the most intelligent, but at the end of the day, and usually that's decided by the moderator or votes, and really who's going to swing that is the eyes of the undecided, because people on either side of the argument are not going to walk away with any different opinions again. So it's the undecided that always, determine the win or loss. And it's not even based on accurate information. It's really based on communication strategy of competitive debate strategy. So that's another reason why we want people to focus on information and being open to learning new information. Is we need to cultivate that appetite in people versus, shove something down their throat.
I find it interesting that the idea of debate takes us to where you're taking a position on things. And I find that really a tricky area because we all have positions on things, regardless of what the topic is. But when we're advocating, or when I'm advocating for the movement versus my personal views, I keep a separation there. Why it's important is often when people ask me about something that they've seen and ask me what the position of the movement is, or they heard so-and-so, is that the position of the movement? I have to make it real clear that that is that person's opinion. That is that person's position. At the movement on the whole, doesn't take a position on things. What I find really interesting about that is it really does stop any type of further position taking on a topic and keeps the subject in the realm of discussing the movement, the orientation of the movement, and any questions that person may have. So the debate format for me has never been on the table as any constructive method to communicating information or providing information in a way that someone can digest.
Thanks, Eva, and also thank you, Jen, for really going into depth on this topic. Hopefully people will find this helpful. I think it's a good place to segue into our next show note here, something posted by Reba on recognizing the feedback that you're getting and being able to have flexible responses to people when you're engaged in discussions about a new social model. So, Reba, go ahead. Let's elaborate on this.
Well, I think it's a further elaboration and just kind of adding on to what Eva and Jen are saying. It's a two-way street when you're communicating. And this is just kind of another way to say it, but you have to recognize the feedback you are getting from people as you're communicating. I'm not communicating at someone, I'm communicating with them. So I speak and they receive what I'm talking about, and then they respond back to me, and I have to recognize that and be able to adjust my tone or my direction. It's really easy to be passionate and respond one-sidedly, and I think that's a lot of what you're talking about with debates, and that having the winner and the loser. But when we're communicating on behalf of this movement, that's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're communicating together with people because then they do want to respond and then they do want to hear. So we do have to be able to be flexible and adjust our tone and adjust our subject matter, and move along with it. And it's a fluid situation. And also, when I'm communicating to people, I like to really make sure my motivation is clear, and underneath it all, I recognize every other person on this planet as just a human being, and I see them basically with compassion, and I try to remember that when I'm communicating with them. I remember that this system is not good to them. Even if they might feel as though they're successful, maybe they have a lot of money, maybe they have a lot of material possessions or things that they think are making them happy. I know ultimately that the way the system is set up is not as beneficial to them as a different type of system could be. And I try to remember that whenever I'm talking to people, I set that motivation first, to see them as just another human being that I do have compassion for and that I do recognize as being interconnected with me and the system.
Reba, I'd like to follow that up. It brings to mind the idea that there can be a tendency for the listening or the flexibility or the adaptability to be seen as a weakness. And the tendency to be aggressive or to be demanding on a point of view has really run its course. And an example I'll use is in the martial arts. There's a term called yielding. And so when force comes in, one yields to the force. Now that can be interpreted as, oh, you're collapsing, you're caving, you're giving in, you're just, you're not standing your ground. The most powerful position to be in, even in the martial arts, is when you're yielding, you're simply allowing that force to expend itself or direct and expend itself to a point where it can be redirected and it can output to whatever that person who's yielding determines. So one of the things I just want to get really clear is a lot of our discussion about communication and communication styles is not based on a collapse, but a force to be contended with in so much that whatever you communicate to me and your method of communication, my goal is to redirect that and to put it back across. And much like you said, Reba, it has to do with where we're coming from. And that can be a really big challenge. We may think that we have our values and our position in the right place, but it is very easy to get pulled off that, especially if we're getting bombarded or we're interacting with people that are supporting us and saying, yeah, everything you're saying and doing is right. And My recent experience was that I was asked to do an impromptu 10-minute speech. So I went up there. I had maybe a half hour to think about, and it had to do with safety and advocacy and leadership and communication. One of the things I recognized right away as feedback is people, number one, recognize authenticity. So checking ourselves in with that and making sure where we're at when we speak and where we're coming from or how we actually live our lives is extremely important. So the authentic nature, the second position is to be straightforward about it. Now, that position of being straightforward is tempered with the authenticity. People will understand where you're coming from when that statement is made. And third, not to be apologetic about where we're coming from. So I mention these because, again, communications can be seen as a passive, kind of a tacit. We'll just sit here and listen to you until you're done, and then, we'll say our points, we move on. It's not that type of interaction. One of the points that I had read about was it's a passive resistance to fight the need to debate or to argue or to make me right at the expense of you. Because for me to be right, you have to be wrong. That, again, for me, that gets us nowhere. That's violence on a verbal level. And to me, that's not tolerable.
Can I quote you on that? That's excellent.
Yep.
I love that you used the martial arts reference because I think about that in my mind because it is the way to describe, instead of resistance, to having an acceptance that's redirecting the energy. And if people want examples of how I do that with various things in the movement, that presentation, it gives those reframes of a couple of different scenarios that I talked about, the communicating RBE concepts. But yeah, I love that.
I really enjoyed that video, Jen, and I learned so much. You really give a lot of great examples of how to relate to people's values and just how to get them talking about it and how to feel as though you understand them, but relate to the RBE concept. So it was really, really helpful. I definitely recommend everybody watching it.
Absolutely. Now I want to bring some things down to examples because with the concepts of how we communicate and the impacts it has, having some practical tools and examples are always beneficial. So wanted to maybe throw this out for discussion on our panel here, and also hopefully it'll be helpful to the listening audience, especially anyone that's been trying to advocate or communicate what a natural law resource-based economy is, and it has fallen on ears that are not receptive at all to what you have to say. And we've all experienced this. I experience this on an ongoing basis, basically. And if you're actually talking about this stuff, you will also realize some people are receptive to it and some people are not, and some people are violently opposed to what you're suggesting because it just short circuits their worldview. We had been touching on these as we go, but I think one of the most important ways of bridging the differences when you're speaking with somebody and you're communicating with someone is a parallel value. I'm asked so often, how do I do this? How do I explain it to somebody? Or, so-and-so thinks I'm crazy for suggesting, a socioeconomic system absent money. And, they just shut me down. How do I talk to someone about this stuff? One of the first things I always bring it back to is, what is the common ground between you and them? And for me, I can find lots of commonality. There's more common than uncommon between all the world's people. I know within the mental frameworks of religion and politics and money, it's apparent how we deem ourselves as incredibly not common at all. But from a natural law point of view, or from a technical context, we are all the same. Human beings all have the same requirements to live, survive, and thrive. And that's why if you go back and you look at a lot of the materials in the movement, you'll see us refer to something as called the life ground. This is the life ground. This is a common life imperative for all people. And we get wrapped up in our ideologies, but finding that parallel value, where can you bridge the difference? If somebody is adversarial to what you're trying to say in terms of, say, economics, maybe they are open to a conversation on the environment. You could point out to them pollution. It's like they may very easily agree with you. Pollution is bad. Why is all that plastic in the middle of the Pacific? Why are the reefs in the oceans dwindling? Why is the water becoming toxified? And you could bridge the gap, find a parallel value, on relating on that level rather than getting totally thrown off or debating them or basically being shut down by somebody's vehement reaction, say, on politics or money. So it's finding that parallel value with the person you're talking to, finding that common ground. And that's probably one of my first recommendations is a useful tool when you're out there communicating this stuff to new people.
It also sets that person you're talking to up to have a language to communicate it to their peers. So when you find that parallel value, if you're able to address it, and I recommend, going to the common arguments and rehearsing responses in advance so you have stuff. But when you're able to connect with that parallel value set and get someone to consider a resource-based economy that might have been an unlikely person to consider it, when you connect with that in the language and the value set they are emotionally connected to, then they will then take your language and use it with their peers to introduce them. So it sort of goes beyond, has a life beyond you if you can do it effectively.
I actually have a question because we've been talking a lot about communications one-on-one. What if someone's doing a video or a presentation regarding the movement or a portion of what the movement advocates? How does one, or how would one tone their communication as far as getting the most effective results from what they're discussing?
It's back to knowing your audience. Is it a particular group of people? Are they environmentally oriented? Are they human rights oriented? If you're able to know as much about, there's got to be some commonality that people showed up for the presentation. Even if it's online, there's probably something that brought them there that's common that you can connect with. And then from there, another thing to do that I like to do is ask a lot of questions that just get people to consider another idea, because that's not a forceful way to, it actually puts the defenses down. If somebody's just able to try something on, they don't have to commit. And you're just sort of asking, how do you feel about this? And if you can frame it in the right way, you can get them to actually have their neurology recircuit to a different area and think, maybe there is a different route here.
Okay, so it seems most of the time in our communications, it's about finding the common ground and then communicating to the audience in regards to what that topic is. I know there's a tendency, or there can be a tendency in the movement to have inward focus on the discussion. In other words, the conversation or the video or what's being made is actually pointed inwards to the membership, which seems to be less effective. I think the idea is to point it outward. So I get what you're saying by knowing your audience in that regard.
Yeah, one of the challenging things about being already in the movement and accepting these ideas is that then there comes a whole new level of expectation of people who are sort of groupies to the material that get really sort of hungry for, like, give me something new. I've already heard that. Give me something new. But they forget that really the whole reason we're gathered and organized is to bring more people to the ideas. And really, a lot of the people who are devouring the content are not as much of the people that are actively creating it, which I'd like to see more of. I'm fine if they're distributing it, but again, then who are they distributing it to? Are we just creating a lot of content that's for internal purposes? It's not really reaching our goals. So that's a good point, Eva. I would like for TZM folks to lay off the we need new content. We actually need new and different voices approaching the same material that is, the core of what we're advocating, so that we can be distributing it to appeal to different audiences based on their value set, their language even, we're doing stuff in an English language, but when stuff gets translated, then it has a different audience. And then from there, you have cultural subsets of things that are going to appeal to different groups. So it's not that we need new information per se on what we advocate as much as we actually need new routes and ways of videos and audio stuff that can be circulated to get more people on board.
I agree. The outward focus is important, and I know it can be scary for people to put the content out there, but we're going to do it one way or another.
I'd like to acknowledge a few people putting content out there that I've really appreciated recently. Wal Woom out of Maryland, she did a rap song that was really cool, and they posted it up on the Zeitgeist Global Facebook page. I really liked it a lot. And Ryan Peace Reeves is constantly creating art. He's really prolific and just putting it out all the time. And I really like Chad Fisher's comedy. And that's just 3 examples. You know, that's someone making music, someone making art, and someone doing comedy and putting it out there. And I personally have never made a presentation and put it up online. But if I were to create that content, or when I do, let's just say when I do create that content, I'm going to be reaching out to one of you probably, or other people in the movement that I've seen create content like that, and ask them for guidance. I mean, some of us have the ideas and we're willing to put in the work, but we might need some pointers on, you know, how to make it finished for the internet, or, you know, help me out with a little bit of editing, or, you know, don't be afraid to reach out to other people in the movement to help you kind of finish up the content, to help you get it out there. We are all here to help one another. I think that's important to remember.
Thanks, Reba. And that's a good point. I know I had to seek out help when I first got started. Stepping up to the microphone was a daunting task for me. I do it now because I see that it needs to be done, and through practicing, I've gotten better at it than I used to be. And also the point that Jen had earlier was not that we need new and more content, new and different content. I also hear those remarks from time to time. It's that we need new and different voices. We need people communicating into the culture that they live inside of, whether it's a subset of, say, the United States or a different country or in a different language. Your voice matters, and it's important that you get out there and communicate this train of thought to new people. So we only have a few moments left with our time today. Would anyone like to give a closing remark for the show?
I'm just reminded that your voice has value. Everyone's voice has value, and you have to remember that. And a huge part of communicating is listening. And if you step out of your comfort zone enough, you will become comfortable in that zone. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Thank you, Reba. And thank you to everyone for tuning in today. Again, I was joined by Jen Wilding, Reba Melfa, and Eva Omori. My name is Jason Lord. The topics we discussed and any YouTube links will be put in the show notes on the Blog Talk site and also in the YouTube description when this gets posted there. And on behalf of our panel and myself, I'd like to thank you everyone for listening. We'll speak to you very soon on a future episode of ZM Global Radio. That's all for today. Bye for now.